What happens when a movie doesn't just rattle audiences, but storms into the courtroom? Grindhouse films were made to push buttons, but some pushed so hard they landed in front of lawyers and judges. Imagine popcorn flicks that didn't just cause walkouts, they caused lawsuits. Curious which outrageous shockers crossed that line? Stick around, because these titles prove the chaos didn't stop at the theater doors. Nightmare 1981. Some Grindhouse films weren't just banned, they put people behind bars. That's the case with Nightmare, a low-budget American shocker about a troubled man haunted by visions that spiral into violent breakdowns. On screen, it looked like another splatter film chasing the post-Halloween boom. Off-screen, it sparked one of the most notorious legal clashes in British film history. When Nightmare arrived in the UK, it became part of the infamous video nasties panic of the early 1980s. Home video was still new, and suddenly regulators feared these tapes were corrupting young minds. Nightmare, with its raw imagery and relentless tone, was singled out as particularly offensive. Instead of just banning it, authorities went further. The British distributor released it without waiting for the censor board's approval, and that misstep proved costly. The court treated it as a criminal offense. Executives were prosecuted, fined, and in a shocking twist, even served time behind bars for circulating the film in its uncut state. Think about that. Not just a fine, not just a slap on the wrist, but actual prison sentences for releasing a horror movie. It set a chilling precedent that terrified other small distributors. In the public's eyes, Nightmare transformed from a cheap slasher into a cultural bogeyman, proof that Grindhouse tapes were more than just bad taste, they were a danger to society. Today, the film has resurfaced and is accessible, though it still carries the weight of that history. Watching it now, you might wonder why it caused so much alarm. The effects are dated, the story is rough, but that's exactly the point. Context made it explosive. Nightmare isn't remembered for its plot, it's remembered for being the only video nasty that actually put people in jail. And in Grindhouse lore, that makes it legendary. The Driller Killer, 1979. Some movie posters were so bold they practically begged for a courtroom showdown. Abel Ferrara's The Driller Killer was one of those films. The poster alone, showing a screaming face lit by an electric tool, turned heads and set censors on edge before anyone had even watched a frame. By the time the movie hit video shelves in the UK, it became ground zero for the video nasty crackdown. The film itself is gritty and grimy, set in late 70s New York, a city drowning in garbage strikes, graffiti, and crumbling buildings. Ferrara plays the lead, Reno Miller, a struggling artist who slowly unravels under the pressure of poverty, noise, and endless frustration. His breakdown plays out in ways that shocked even hardened horror fans. What set the film apart wasn't just the imagery, but how close it felt to reality. Shot on real streets with documentary-style grit, it captured the hopelessness of its time with unnerving accuracy. When UK authorities got wind of it, the backlash was immediate. The poster was plastered across video shop windows, shocking parents and attracting politicians who were eager to make an example out of something. The Driller Killer was hauled into court as one of the first titles successfully prosecuted under the Obscene Publications Act. Distributors faced legal trouble, and the movie was outright banned for years. Ironically, the notoriety only cemented its cult status. Looking back, it's clear the film was both a victim of timing and a master of provocation. In another era, it might have slipped by unnoticed. Instead, it became a lightning rod for the debate over what films should or shouldn't be allowed into living rooms. Now, it streams freely, its raw edges intact, and audiences can finally judge it on its own terms. The Driller Killer didn't just break rules. It became the poster child for a moral panic. And if you ask Grindhouse fans, that's exactly what gave it lasting power. The Town That Dreaded Sundown, 1976. Sometimes the scariest thing about a Grindhouse film isn't the villain on screen, it's the lawsuit waiting outside the theater. The Town That Dreaded Sundown, a semi-fictional retelling of the Phantom Killer case in Texarkana, played like a drive-in horror gem, but it quickly marched into courtrooms. Released in 1976, the movie blended fact and fiction to tell the story of a masked figure terrorizing a small town in the 1,940 seconds. The film's marketing leaned heavily on its based on true events tagline, which got plenty of attention, but not everyone appreciated the attention. One of the surviving family members of a real victim wasn't just upset, they were outraged. They filed a $1.3 million invasion of privacy lawsuit, arguing the film exploited their tragedy without consent. The case made headlines, transforming what had been a regional horror hit into a nationwide controversy. While the lawsuit was eventually dismissed, the damage was done. The film was branded as a tasteless exploitation of real grief. Ironically, that courtroom drama only fed into its Grindhouse reputation. What better proof that a movie had crossed a line than a grieving family demanding its removal? At the time, critics weren't sure what to make of it. Some saw a pulpy slasher flick. Others called it a chilling docudrama. But with a lawsuit hanging over it, audiences rushed to see what the fuss was about. Instead of killing interest, the case supercharged it. By the time it returned to late-night TV slots and VHS shelves, the town that dreaded Sundown had become a cult staple. Today, both the original and its 2014 meta-sequel are widely available, proving the story still resonates. The legal battle faded, but its legacy stuck. A Grindhouse shocker so bold, it blurred the line between fact, fiction, and family outrage. For fans, that lawsuit sealed its place in history, because sometimes the scariest shadows don't come from the screen. They come from the courthouse. Baise-moi 2000. Sometimes the most controversial Grindhouse titles don't come from America or Italy, they come from France. Baise-moi hit French theaters in 2000 and immediately detonated a cultural bomb. The film follows two women on a violent road trip of retaliation and revenge. Gritty, furious, and unpolished, it rejected cinematic polish for raw immediacy. But it wasn't the content alone that set off alarms. It was the legal fallout. Initially rated for adults, Baise-moi was suddenly thrown into chaos when France's highest administrative court intervened. The rating board had given it a 16 classification, but watchdog groups cried foul, arguing the content was far too strong for that. The case went to the Conseil d'État, which annulled the decision and pushed the movie into the dreaded X category, a classification usually reserved for adult-only features shown in limited venues. This move was unprecedented for a mainstream release, and the case became a national debate about censorship. France prided itself on artistic freedom, but here was a movie essentially being forced out of the general market. Distributors fought back, critics weighed in, and the government eventually had to adjust its entire rating system to deal with the controversy. Despite the courtroom drama, Baise-moi carved out its place as a Grindhouse milestone. It showed that the same fury and outlaw energy once reserved for New York's 42nd Street or Italy's exploitation wave could still ignite lawsuits in modern Europe. Today, it streams in many regions, its reputation intact, its shock still raw. For audiences, it's more than just a road movie. It's a reminder that Grindhouse can still shake the foundations of law. The Fourth Kind, 2009. Sometimes it's not the content on screen that lands a film in court, but the marketing around it. The Fourth Kind, a found-footage-style thriller starring Milla Jovovich, claimed to be based on real disappearances in Nome, Alaska. The film used faux news reports and supposedly true accounts to heighten its eerie atmosphere. But in its quest for authenticity, the marketing team crossed a line. The problem? Those news articles were lifted from real Alaskan newspapers. The studios had fabricated fake clippings and attributed them to actual publications without permission. The local press didn't just roll their eyes, they sued. Several Alaskan outlets took Universal Pictures to court for misusing their names and credibility. The case didn't drag on for years. Universal quickly agreed to a settlement, paying damages and scrubbing the offending materials from their websites. But the incident made headlines and gave the film an aura of infamy. Instead of just being another horror thriller, it became known as the movie that lied so convincingly its own studio had to face judges. Ironically, the controversy may have helped. Audiences curious about the true story flocked to theaters and rentals. The blending of reality and fiction created an atmosphere that made the scares feel more tangible, even after the truth came out. Today, The Fourth Kind is still widely available. Watching it now, you can see how clever marketing turned into a courtroom liability. It's a reminder that Grindhouse shock doesn't always come from graphic imagery. It can come from bold claims that hit too close to home. And in this case, the lawyers made sure the studio paid for the stunt. The Lawnmower Man, 1992. Imagine a horror sci-fi so loose with source material that the author himself dragged it into court. That's the saga of The Lawnmower Man, a 1992 cybershock spectacle directed by Brett Leonard. Marketed as Stephen King's The Lawnmower Man, it promised a cinematic take on the legendary writer's eerie short story. Only one problem: the finished movie had almost nothing to do with King's tale. The story on screen followed a scientist experimenting with virtual reality and genetic enhancements, transforming a simple gardener into something monstrous. It was neon-lit body horror mixed with 90s computer graphics, way removed from King's original, which was about something entirely different. When audiences saw Stephen King splashed across the posters, they assumed authenticity. King did not agree. The author filed a lawsuit to have his name removed from the marketing, claiming false advertising. Courts sided with him, ordering distributors to pull his name from ads, VHS boxes, and trailers. For a while, the film was legally required to appear without King's credit, though some early releases had already slipped out. The case became a landmark in showing how far studios could stretch an author's reputation before facing legal blowback. Ironically, the lawsuit probably helped the movie's legacy. Without King's name, it might have faded into obscurity. With it, and the legal headlines, it became infamous, a symbol of 90s excess where Hollywood slapped a big name on a project and hoped nobody would notice. Today, The Lawnmower Man streams as a relic of its time, more camp than chilling, but still fascinating. Its lawsuit gave Grindhouse fans a lesson. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what happens in the movie. It's the fight over who gets credit for it. Natural Born Killers, 1994. When a movie is accused of inspiring real crimes, you know the lawyers won't be far behind. Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers is one of the most notorious examples. A kaleidoscope of violence, satire, and media criticism, it followed Mickey and Mallory Knox on a frenzied crime spree, portrayed almost like rock stars. The film's style was wild, quick cuts, shifting film stocks, surreal imagery, designed to unsettle as much as entertain. Critics were divided. Some praised its audacity, others condemned it as reckless glorification. But the most dramatic fallout came when Patsy Byers' family filed a lawsuit after she was injured during a robbery. The attackers claimed they were inspired by Natural Born Killers. The lawsuit accused Stone and Warner Brothers of incitement, arguing the film encouraged violence. The case dragged through appeals, becoming a flashpoint in debates about media responsibility. Ultimately, the court dismissed it, ruling the filmmakers had First Amendment protection. But the lawsuit itself made headlines worldwide. Natural Born Killers wasn't just a controversial movie anymore. It was Exhibit A in a real legal battle about art versus influence. For Grindhouse fans, the irony is rich. Stone had set out to satirize how media glorifies criminals, and his film ended up blamed for doing exactly that. To this day, it remains a lightning rod. Watching it now, the chaos still feels raw, but the real story is how it forced courts to ask a bizarre question. Can a movie be guilty of inspiring crime? The judges said no, but the debate still lingers. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Sometimes lawsuits come not from copycats, but from censors who simply can't handle what they see. Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left hit theaters in 1972 and instantly rewrote the rules of horror. Shot with documentary roughness, it told the grim story of two girls who encounter a gang of fugitives, leading to horrific consequences. What followed was revenge that shocked audiences even more than the crime itself. It wasn't just another Grindhouse title, it was a line in the sand. Censors in multiple countries tried to chop it down, some outright banning it. The UK in particular became a battleground. When distributors attempted to release it on VHS during the 1980s, it landed on the infamous Video Nasties list and was banned outright under obscenity laws. Court cases dragged on, with distributors fined and tapes confiscated at the border. The lawsuits and seizures only amplified its myth. Fans swapped bootlegs. Critics argued over whether it was exploitation or grim social commentary, and every ban seemed to increase demand. By the time uncut versions were finally approved decades later, The Last House on the Left had achieved legendary status. What made it dangerous wasn't just the imagery, but how real it felt. Craven and producer Sean S. Cunningham stripped away gothic trappings, leaving viewers face-to-face with raw cruelty and equally raw revenge. No wonder courts tried to bury it. This was a movie that refused to let anyone off the hook. Today, it streams in multiple editions, but the shadow of those bans remains part of its DNA. More than just a film, it became a legal and cultural milestone, proof that Grindhouse could be so powerful it frightened governments. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. Few Grindhouse titles have been as reviled by critics yet defended by fans as fiercely as this one. Released in 1978, Miyazarki's I Spit on Your Grave became one of the most polarizing exploitation films ever made. What looked like a standard revenge story turned into something far more extreme, and the fallout wasn't just angry reviews, it was years of legal bans and seizures. In Britain, the movie became a target during the video nasties panic of the early 80s. Authorities were so disturbed by its relentless imagery that they didn't just demand cuts, they tried to wipe it out completely. Home video distributors who dared release it uncut risked raids, confiscations, and obscenity charges. The film was repeatedly denied certification, and every attempt to re-release it sparked more legal wrangling. For years, fans could only access it through underground copies smuggled across borders. What fueled the storm was how unflinching the movie felt. Unlike the slick Hollywood revenge thrillers of the same era, this one shot in real locations with raw, unpolished grit. There was no distance, no fantasy escape. That intimacy made audiences deeply uncomfortable, and censors doubled down. Critics condemned it as garbage, but cult audiences argued it gave power to a character fighting back in brutal ways. The lawsuits and bans turned I Spit on Your Grave into forbidden fruit. Instead of killing it, censorship made it notorious. By the time it finally gained wider release decades later, it had already carved out a legend as one of the most controversial Grindhouse shockers ever made. Today, it's accessible online, uncut in many regions, carrying all the baggage of its past. For Grindhouse fans, it's the textbook example of how the courtroom can elevate a film from obscurity to myth. SS Experiment Camp 1976. Some movies seem designed not just to shock audiences, but to dare governments to shut them down. SS Experiment Camp, released in 1976, falls squarely into that category. Part of the short-lived Nazi-sploitation cycle, it took Grindhouse sensationalism and wrapped it in uniforms, cruelty, and over-the-top theatrics. The result was a film that ignited outrage across Europe. In the UK, it became one of the most infamous video nasties. Authorities didn't hesitate. The film was prosecuted under the Obscene Publications Act, banned outright, and distributors faced legal action for attempting to circulate it. Courtrooms turned into battlegrounds over whether this was legitimate cinema or just provocation with no artistic merit. The prosecutors won, and the film vanished from shelves for years. What's striking about SS Experiment Camp is how far it leaned into spectacle. Sets resembled lurid pulp novel covers. Characters were exaggerated caricatures, and yet the imagery pushed boundaries so aggressively that even hardened Grindhouse audiences were left reeling. It wasn't subtle, and that was the point, but in a country still grappling with the legacy of war, it was seen as crossing a line. Ironically, the ban only boosted its cult appeal. Bootleg copies circulated under the table, and fans whispered about how outrageous it was. By the time it was eventually re-released decades later, its reputation had already made it a collector's item. Today, you can find it streaming or on disc, but its legacy is inseparable from the courtroom battles that tried to erase it. In the Grindhouse tradition, SS Experiment Camp proved that sometimes the most forbidden films are the ones people never stop talking about. The New York Ripper, 1982. Lucio Fulci was already known for pushing boundaries, but with the New York Ripper, he crossed into uncharted legal territory. Released in 1982, this Italian giallo took Fulci's flair for stylish gore and slammed it head-on with sleaze. The result was a film so notorious that even countries used to violent cinema said, enough. The story followed a detective hunting a killer in New York, but Fulci's approach stripped away glamour. Instead, it leaned into grimy streets, seedy characters, and shock sequences that critics blasted as mean-spirited. Italian audiences were no strangers to graphic horror, but this one caused outrage even at home. In the UK, censors took an even harder line. The British Board of Film Classification didn't just demand cuts, they outright rejected the film for classification. Customs officials seized copies, distributors faced legal pushback, and the film became another name on the growing video nasties blacklist. The rejection wasn't just about content, it was about tone. Critics argued the New York Ripper offered no moral center, no lesson, just relentless ugliness. Fulci's defenders countered that it was a reflection of urban decay, a grotesque mirror held up to a city in decline. Either way, the authorities won the legal fight. For years, the film was virtually impossible to see legally in the UK. Of course, like every banned Grindhouse gem, the ban only amplified demand. Horror fans hunted for bootlegs, and whispers about its extremity only added to its mystique. Today, it's widely available, uncut, and unapologetic, a testament to how censorship often turns a film into legend. Fulci never shied away from controversy, but with the New York Ripper, he proved that Grindhouse could still ignite full-blown courtroom wars well into the 80s. Nekromantik, 1991. What happens when a horror film is so extreme the police literally walk into theaters and shut it down? That's exactly the story of Nekromantik 2, the German underground sequel directed by Jörg Buttgereit. While the first film had already caused shockwaves in cult circles, the sequel escalated things and sparked one of the most bizarre legal battles in modern Grindhouse history. The movie followed a woman coping with grief in unconventional ways, blending romance with scenes designed purely to provoke. It was shot on a shoestring budget, but what it lacked in polish, it made up for in audacity. German authorities, however, weren't impressed by its boldness. Within days of its release, police raided Heron, video stores, and even confiscated film reels from theaters. The charge? That the movie violated laws against obscene media. The distributor fought back, arguing the film was a piece of art and deserved protection. What followed was a tug-of-war between artists and the state. Eventually, higher courts ruled in favor of the filmmakers, acknowledging it had artistic merit, even if it was disturbing. That decision marked a turning point in how extreme films could be treated under German law. The irony is that the controversy propelled Nekromantik too far beyond its intended niche. What might have remained a micro-budget oddity suddenly became international news. Collectors scrambled for copies, and its status as a banned film gave it an aura no marketing campaign could ever buy. Today, it's available online. Its shock factor dulled somewhat by time, but its legend intact. More than a movie, Nekromantik 2 became a courtroom battleground where freedom of expression clashed with moral outrage. And in Grindhouse tradition, the outlaw spirit won in the end. The Human Centipede 2, full sequence 2011. Some Grindhouse movies don't just get banned, they get dissected line by censors. That's what happened to the Human Centipede 2. Full sequence, Tom Six's follow-up to his already infamous Shocker. While the first film gained notoriety for its outrageous concept, the sequel turned everything up louder, darker, and deliberately more grotesque. The British Board of Film Classification refused to give it a certificate at all, effectively banning it from release. Their statement was unusually detailed, describing why they believed the film crossed boundaries of taste and decency. It wasn't just denied, it was dissected in public, sparking headlines around the world. The filmmakers didn't give up. They submitted a heavily edited version that eventually squeaked through, but by then the movie's reputation had already been sealed. Fans clamored to see what the censors wanted cut, and the banned version became a sought-after prize. Meanwhile, critics and journalists debated whether the BBFC had overstepped, questioning whether adults should be allowed to decide for themselves. The controversy turned The Human Centipede 2 into more than a sequel. It became a statement about censorship itself. Tom Six leaned into the infamy, calling attention to the ban in interviews and marketing. Instead of killing the movie, the legal fight made it impossible to ignore. Today, it's widely available in multiple cuts, and viewers can judge for themselves whether it justified the panic. But in Grindhouse tradition, the real story isn't just what's on screen, it's how the authorities tried and failed to bury it. Grindhouse was never meant to play it safe, but these films proved that sometimes the fallout doesn't end with critics or censors. It ends with lawyers, lawsuits, and bans. From distributors hauled into court to posters sparking legal outrage, each movie carved out a legacy bigger than its budget. So, which one shocked you the most? Drop your pick in the comments, hit subscribe for more cinematic chaos, and remember, in Grindhouse, the real drama often starts after the credits roll.